Welcome back to Get In The Mecha. I'm your host Jamal today, and in today's episode we are talking about Sonny Boy, and I also can't believe that I tried to make it not so awkward that we are on video now. So welcome to the first video podcast for Get In The Mecha. It's going to be the same show. I don't want to talk about it too much and dwell on it as if major things have changed. It's the same thing, just me kind of speaking in the corner. There'll be some images, and it's the same thing. So welcome back to the show, and in today's episode we are discussing Sonny Boy, and Sonny Boy is an anime that I have been really passionate about as of late, really because it's so good. I'm just going to be honest about it. It's only been 3 episodes, and I have only seen 2 out of the 3 because I was busy preparing for this episode and setting this whole thing up, so I didn't really have time to watch the 3rd episode yet. But I've been really following on with Natsume's work, Shingo Natsume, the director's work, alongside all the PVs and all the other things involved. And I kind of want to talk a lot about just everything in regards to that, and talking about Natsume's style and direction, how I feel about this anime. And as this podcast is titled, we're just going to dissect Sonny Boy, essentially. Before we do get into this week's episode, though, I do want to point out that we do have a review for this week, and this review comes from Spain, and it comes from PGSME. I apologize if I did say that wrong. I just didn't really know how to say that in one word. And it's a pretty short review, but I really like it. It's cool podcast with a little ooh. Thank you very much for the review. And if you do want to leave a review for this show, it really does help it out. And I say this every time. Then feel free to do so. That is, if you go to Apple Podcasts, there'll be a link in the description. Leave it a review and it will help out the show and the charts and all that stuff. And so let's get into the podcast for this week. That is episode 97 of Get In The Mecha. A look into Sonny Boy and really what it's all about. Before we do get into this episode, I should alert you that there will be spoilers, of course, for Sonny Boy. Why else? I'm not going to be covering it in insane detail, so take that as a light spoiler warning, but do beware that I am going to be talking about this anime and what it's about. Sonny Boy has been an anime that I've been really interested in quite a bit. It's only been 3 weeks, I know, but I've been following on with the PVs, the previews, and the pre-screening, which I watched a month before via Funimation, which was really good. And it kind of ruined the anime a bit. It didn't ruin it, okay, but it definitely reduced some of the hype because I was waiting about a month and then a week after that month for the 2nd episode. But overall, really good stuff. I've also been getting really deep into Natsume's work and him as a director and also not even just him, just Madhouse as a whole. I watched recently Kemonozume, directed by Masaki Yuasa. I also watched The Tatami Galaxy, which also features Shingo Natsume in episode 6, alongside Akka 13 and Space Dandy. It's been a really wild ride for me in the past month, just consuming loads of Natsume work and loads of directors which he takes inspiration from. I've discovered quite a few things about his style in regards to how he plays with depth and color and all these things that I just wouldn't have picked up on if I didn't really dive really deep into these works and just immerse myself within them. And now we're finally seeing Natsume direct his almost own original anime that is scripted by him, and I do believe that there isn't a chief director in play either. And so this is really going to be Natsume's vision. This is Shingo Natsume's anime, and I'm really excited for it, and it's definitely been showing really positive signs at the moment. As we've discussed on our original anime episode, there's just something really thrilling about originals. The feeling of just not knowing what is going to happen and just being completely taken by surprise is something that is so magical, and something that I unfortunately don't think that adaptations can really live up to in the same respects. The anime's premise is pretty short, and it's quite it is a bit out there, or at least it's very different to anything I've seen besides the manga Drifting Classroom, even though I haven't actually read it. Besides that, it's quite to the point, and you have to be there for the experience. It sounds pretty weird on paper, but in reality, it works out. Essentially, what happens is that one day, 36 school kids find themselves literally drifting in what seems to be nothingness, this weird darkness at school. And what they have to do is discover what the heck happened and how do they get back to their quote-unquote normal world. It's very hard to envision. I acknowledge that, and that's why the video podcast comes at the perfect time when you can actually see what I'm trying to say, besides just imagining what I'm saying. But yeah, sounds weird on paper, but in reality, it plays out really well, and I think Natsume really knows what he's doing. Something that I really love about Sonny Boy is how it manages to explore the world with its characters. It's kind of I liked to compare it to, as someone that does study a bit of politics, I like to compare it to this hypothetical state of nature that a lot of political theorists have discussed in the past, like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes most famously. And the state of nature is essentially this stateless society where it's used again for political theory, but it's this hypothetical situation where if there wasn't a state, if there wasn't government and order, how would the society run? How would it work and function? And that is essentially what Sonny Boy episode 1 is. And I really love how this is kind of done in a visual manner by having this complete black background in the place in which they're drifting. There is no outside influence. There's no one looking in on them. It's just them. They're isolated in nothing, or that's at least what they think anyway. I don't mean to get too educational, but when you think of someone like Thomas Hobbes, they would basically say is that without a state would be in perpetual war. We would be these savages that would constantly be fighting before something like a social contract and a state is established. And Sonny Boy kind of doesn't go down that route. They don't immediately begin fighting because there's literally no order, or at least no complete established order, even though that begins to build. And on that point, that's what I really like about this anime, the fact that order builds alongside, we get to see order build itself. It doesn't come out of nowhere and someone just says, okay, I'm running things now, or things have to build and build momentum. And that's something that's really magical about this anime, watching it happen live and seeing rules become established because rules need to be established is something that's just really awesome. What is perhaps different about Sonny Boy versus this stateless society metaphor that I was getting at is that they have to kind of understand what the laws are. The laws already exist. They're kind of like natural laws. They have to discover what they are rather than them completely making them. But that being said, they still have to coat this in order and in... They have to make it their own, really, because how will those laws will exist, yes, but they need a way to use them appropriately and effectively. Where Sonny Boy gets really interesting though, and again as a bit of a politics person behind the scenes, this gets really juicy for me. What is really interesting is how you get this almost instantaneous emergence of these political systems and structures in a way that are made amongst the group. Groups form, camps form. It's not to say, oh, we have this camp and that camp, but there's definitely some division and hierarchy that manages to form. I suppose we could say that this is a bit of a commentary on real life, where amongst some people will think that they are better than others, or they feel a need to become these almost natural leaders, and you have other people that simply just want to coast along, very much like the main character of this show. I think that Sonny Boy is probably a bit of a commentary on, or we can definitely take some some of it as a commentary on real life and who we are as humans. It's able to uncover human nature by seeing what it's like when there is nothing outside influencing it. It's who are these people, and what do they have to offer, and how do they act in this rather uncontrolled environment. Those that do take the approach of attempting to establish order and create these rules in the school and amongst the kids kind of reflects their own biases. And I also think that this is a very a very big commentary on political life and what politicians in a lot of cases do, where yes, they are saying law and order, but law and order already reflects the biases and injustices within society. And Sonny Boy is just kind of proving that this is a very human thing that people do. Even if you are attempting to make order for everybody, a lot of the time you are still creating order that is surrounded amongst your view of order. Order is very much subjective, and one person's idea of it is different to another. And that's something we get to see alive in the show week by week. You can even argue that there's a bit of a political spectrum in this anime. I'm taking this a bit far, but I really want to try and prove a point here. People are inherently political, and we get to see that there are very differing political views as to how this group should be run, and this group is kind of like a microcosm of society. We have different people from different walks of life, and even of different ethnicities, and so it becomes this thing of how should we run these people, and some people take on that role, and some of them don't really do a good job at it, in all honesty. You have a bit of a conservative group that attempts to replicate these similar hierarchies that have already been existent within the school, creating this council body, very much like a privy council or a government. And then you have some who kind of try to break this down and see it as a new opportunity to reject that order and seek freedom and their own personal property and solace. And there are even some more apolitical characters that kind of just coast along and I don't think they really belong on the spectrum. And when I say political spectrum, I'm not talking like our politics and the left and the right and all that. I don't want to get into that, but I just mean as in just in very basic terms, some of the groups are more conservative, as in they want to keep things the same, they want to keep things rigid, and then you have others that want to do something different. They want to take the opportunity to seek freedom and try new things, but they're not, again, completely against the idea of having rules. The rules exist, but again, rules kind of exist to be broken. And I also think that something that's interesting about Sonny Boy is that we have to learn about how the rules can be broken and how they can be twisted and what will happen if we break a rule, because that's equally as important as learning what the rules are. I think an anime like Sonny Boy is very needed, mostly because it really makes one rethink how we view politics in anime. When I say politics, I don't mean as in sort of genuine politics, but I mean it as in how we understand political themes within anime, very much like how we talk about Aka 13 and its political ideas, and say nationalism and federalism and so forth. Sonny Boy also is kind of political in a way, but views it in a different way that I think is quite important. We have a few of these political fantasies in anime, notably the isekai political fantasy, the classic that involves a town or nation and bringing factions together. Again, we have something like Aka, which is very much about this emerging coup d'etat within the government and amongst Aka, and how one mitigates this, and also just this whole federal setup where we have the different districts and how they will interact with each other. It's a very interesting anime. I recommend checking Aka 13 out. But Sonny Boy begins with a much more primitive idea of politics. It's politics in its most raw form almost, where there is no state. How do we create order? How do we create rules? What are rules? And so forth. And I think it's a very interesting dimension to it, and one which I commend Natsume for doing, because I think it's definitely away from a lot of what the market has so far, the market being like the space of anime. And I think it just gives a great insight into human nature and so forth. Let's talk a bit more about direction and the visual side of Sonny Boy. I think the way Sonny Boy presents itself means that discussing order and how it manifests itself into societies is quite cool. And again, we go back to stuff like the black background for most of the outside, and even just the very monocolored layouts that Natsume uses in terms of the almost flat blue, the flat orange, the flat greens, and you will see this as you go through his work. That's the thing. This isn't something that is completely unique to Natsume, or is it something that he hasn't done before? If you go to the Tatami Galaxy episode 6, his debut at Madhouse as storyboard and episode director, you'll see that that episode is full of that very block-colored approach. And then when you go to the Aka 13 OP, it's the very same deal. Natsume's direction is quite subtle but also very effective in my opinion. The camera feels more like an observer than an active participant in what is going on. It's almost sitting back on the island watching the events take place and go down. Furthermore, there's no inner monologuing, and we kind of just have to take in what the characters have to say. That sounds a bit weird, but like I think we do often have the privilege of being in the characters' heads, but Sonny Boy takes a very raw approach, and we're not in the characters' heads. We have to sit back and just take in what they give us, and that's what I also think will be really cool about it, because when we think of this as this political sort of anime, the deception and the lies and the intentions become a lot easier, a lot harder, to read, rather than having that advantage potentially of, okay, I know what this person might be thinking, or they might straight up just say what they intend to do. In this case, we don't have the privilege, and it's a much more stripped back way of filming and filmmaking as a whole, but I think it's one that's very advantageous in that regard. There's also very minimal music, and I know I'm not the first one to point this out. The first episode pretty much has only one song, which is the song at the end being the OP, and we don't even have an opening sequence, so that also kind of makes things a bit funny. Where I only found out very recently, but it's very funny how you're just thrown right in. There's no warm up, there's no break up. It's go on for the full 20 minutes and then OP at the end, and then that's the anime for the week. No preview either. It capitalizes on what original anime has always been good at, being the fact that there is no way of really knowing what is going to happen next week unless you have some sort of inside information, which very little people have, and you're pretty much just like them in the dark, not just during the show, but outside of the show as well. And that is what Sonny Boy is really good at. But back to the music, which we're actually speaking about. I really like this. I'm a big fan of something like, or shows like SSS's Steiner Xenon, which, as you know, capitalizes on the diegetic sound, the sound that they can hear in their own space. And so when you have this very ambient, I don't say music, but sound, where you hear the birds chirping and the air just blowing, it's very immersive in that regard. And it's also something that I've felt really good about when it comes to Super Cub as well this year. Another kind of slept on anime that I do recommend. When you pair this with Shingo Natsume's love for the wide shot, or the extreme wide shot that looks absolutely stunning, by the way, we are put very far away from the people and individuals, but it looks beautiful, honestly, and it couldn't be more realistic as a result. We were just briefly talking about SSS's Steiner Xenon, and I don't want to shill it too much because I already did. I did a lot of my shilling in that episode already, but I really love the way Amamiya and Natsume have a very similar way and similar tactics of humanizing their characters in the world around them by bringing us into the world, by making us spectators in the world rather than simply just viewers on a screen. I'm just so happy that Shingo Natsume is doing an original anime, honestly, because I feel like, and this is not a knock on Aka 13, but I feel like Natsume's vision in Aka starts off really well, but it kind of gets diluted as it moves forward. And I feel like doing an original this time And the lack of constraint to a piece of source material really allows it to just be what it wants to be, and he can script it and storyboard it in the way in which he wants and how he really wants it to go. There's again that lack of constraint, and even so, that means that even on the episodes he isn't storyboarding, I feel like the scripts can definitely cater towards it being what he's into and his own conventions and so forth. I'm just a really big fan of his ideas when it comes to his individual storyboarded episodes and openings, like the Aka 13 opening, in the way he uses layers for... It doesn't move very much. When I say move, as in there isn't much character animation. The characters aren't the ones doing most of the movement. It's more so the camera, but the illustrations and how they're laid amongst each other, and also the way they use these block colors as well, a very Natsume thing to do, makes it so pleasant to watch. I know there's Space Dandy and One Punch Man as well, but I don't feel like those are great examples of comparing the Natsume style. There are very Natsume tropes within One Punch Man and Space Dandy, definitely. Space Dandy, I'd say is more of a closer thing to that. But I would say that because there are so many competing visions, or I don't even know if competing, but just there's such a diverse range of visions in Space Dandy. We have an episode from Eun Choi, we have an episode from Masaki Yuasa, we have an episode from Kiyotaka Oshiyama, and so many more creatives. And so it becomes very difficult to see Natsume only in that, and you have to see all these different animators and creators within that. And it's an incredible anime. Of course it is. I highly recommend Space Dandy, but Sonny Boy is a bit of a different thing to that. I feel like it's much more true to Natsume as an individual creator and storyboard artist. What is also really great is that he's working with people that he's already worked with before, be it Gosai Oda or Keita Nagasaka. And so I think that he can really execute this vision well, and I definitely hope he can. We've come close with originals like perhaps Vivi or Wonder Egg, and I feel like Sonny Boy is just going to be the one that's going to smash it this year. Wonder Egg did smash it in my opinion, but that's another episode for another day. But I think that Sonny Boy is one that really has the potential, and I feel like Natsume's been building to this across his career. Even if I'll return to the Tatami Galaxy episode 6, that episode looks a lot like Sonny Boy in some regards. It's still very Yuasa in a lot of ways, but it also has that Natsume touch that you'll see in the Aka 13 OP or Aka 13 episode 1 or even Boogie Pop episode 1 and Sonny Boy as well. This anime is no mistake, and I think that this is a massive contender for anime of the year. Sonny Boy is just another great original anime as of now, and I think it's really worth checking out, and worth checking out Natsume's vision as well, because this is his show, and hopefully you'll buy into it as much as I did. With that being said, that is the podcast for this week. I don't know how I'm gonna work out closing thoughts these days. I'm gonna try and figure it out next week, because we have had all these changes in the show. It is a bit difficult to just, okay, I'm gonna close with some more thoughts, because you can rewind the video and all that, but I'll sort that out another time. But thank you for listening to this episode. If you do want to support this show, there are a few things you can do to do so. The first one would be, if you are watching the video version of this podcast, if you could like, subscribe, and do all those things, the YouTubery things. I'm still kind of new here, so help me out here, and that will help it do all its crazy things in the algorithm. And also, if you want to support this on audio, what can you do? You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, very much like PGSME did, and it can be a short review. It can literally be a cool podcast. It can be a long review. I don't mind. A 5-star review on Apple Podcasts goes a long way, and it would mean a lot if you did so, if you have an Apple device, that is, or you have access to iTunes. So thank you for listening this week. I will see you next week on the podcast. I don't know how this is going to go moving forward, doing video constantly, but I'm in for the ride, and it's definitely going to be fun. So thank you for listening. I have been your host, Shimao, today. Have a lovely rest of your week, and this has been Get In The Mecha. The music in this episode goes as follows: Synthwave by Alex McCulloch, and Mandatory Overtime by Joth.